Hi, my name is Trainmaster04, and today's video I'll be reviewing and operating Lionel's version of Union Pacific Railroad's Veranda turbine with the TMCC command system. So sit back and relax and enjoy the show.
Union Pacific 4014, do you read me? Over. Roger that. Union Pacific 4014, I read you. Over. Start up and stand by. Over. Yes, sir. Start up and stand by.
To start this video off, let me actually give you a brief explanation and history lesson on UP's Veranda turbines, as well as the whole family of gas turbines as well as coal turbines that the Union Pacific Railroad have built as well as ran on their railroad. Then after that, I'll give you some of the statistics on the model, show you some of the molded in and separately applied detailing, and then finally wrap the video up by showing you what it can do, such as operate, what type of sounds it can produce, and so on and so forth. So, let's get started. To start off, let me actually explain what a gas turbine is and also what a turbine locomotive is in general, and also give a brief history lesson on the Veranda turbine itself and also how it is connected with the Union Pacific Railroad. A gas turbine electric locomotive, or GTEL for short, is essentially what the name states. It is a gas-powered electric turbine. Now, you may be thinking that a gas turbine is an old piece of technology. Well, you are kind of right, because the turbine idea of, or let me rephrase, putting a turbine in a locomotive has been actually around for many decades, starting with the Pennsylvania Railroad with their S1 steam turbine, which was not too swell of a success. Now, the reason behind a turbine-powered locomotive is very simple. So, for many, many years, every railroad, or most railroads, have always been trying to find out or figure out what type of locomotive or design a locomotive that will have a great amount of horsepower, greater than or equal to a steam locomotive, but be as efficient as a diesel locomotive. Now, with that in thought, most railroads look towards alternate power sources, such as nuclear power source in the 1950s, gas turbine, as you see right in front of you, and even steam turbine. Now, out of those three, the nuclear option, well, as is really a nuclear option, and was way out of hand for actually purchasing and maintaining one of those type of locomotives. And then the steam turbine was proven by both the Pennsylvania, Chesapeake and Ohio, and Norfolk and Western railroads, which showed that it can be done, but those locomotives and the way they were designed were just too complicated and were not able to sustain a great amount of horsepower to equal a good enough economy, such as fuel economy. Now, where the gas turbines were more successful because the idea was, instead of taking the turbine and it be connected directly to the drivers, instead the turbine would be used for its normal purpose, which is creating electricity to then be used to power motors for the drivers. Now that you have a better understanding about the gas turbine type locomotive, let me now actually get into the other part of this segment, and that is, how did UP actually get into this niche market of turbine-powered locomotives? Well, it is very simple. So, as stated earlier, most railroads were trying to find better ways of motive power, or in other words, better fuel economy, but great amount of horsepower. So, UP, as a major railroad, decided, let's try to get into the market of turbine power. Now, they have seen the records and also heard of the performances of both the steam turbines of the C&O and N&W, and also heard of the flaws and failures of the Pennsylvania S1 type steam turbine. But with that knowledge, instead of going to the route of making it to where the turbine is connected to the drivers, instead they went down the route of where the turbine would be powered by still a fuel source such as coal, which UP did try with that with a 3-unit coal turbine, but instead went with a gas fueled turbine. And instead, the turbine would actually generate electricity to then be used for electric motors for the trucks. Now, this was a better idea for a few reasons. One, the maintenance would be a little bit lower because the locomotive would not have to have a water condenser to condense the used steam that has been generated or pumped through the turbine. The second part is also they can actually use parts readily available and also still get the right amount of horsepower needed in order to sustain a reasonable amount of weight being pulled behind the locomotive. Now, the first prototype turbine was number 1, very appropriate. And something interesting about that one is it had 2 cabs on each end, but that will be another story for another day. But after the number 1 was a success and UP realized that they were onto something, they then went and took another step forward and created the Veranda class. Now, the Veranda class is a little bit different. More specifically, the model is actually a little bit different than what the first series of the Veranda class was. The first Veranda classes actually had their fuel tanks mounted underneath the frame. And also, the walkway that you see running along the length of the locomotive, such as right here, this actually was not there on the very first models. Instead, it was just on the side. There was no walkway at all down through the side of the locomotive. It was, in other words, it was similar to E8s, E7s, F3s, and so on and so forth, where you had to go through from the cab, through a door to the back, or through a door on the side. Now, over time, and also as new reports of how the locomotive was handling and performing, UP realized they needed to make a few changes. One being they had to swap out the fuel tank with a ballast because of traction and stick a fuel tender on the rear end as the locomotive's fuel source, which doubled as a greater advantage for the locomotive since this thing was a fuel chugger. And also, they changed the walkway to actually access both the diesel engine and the turbine on board. This was due to engineers and crew members maintaining the locomotive having a hard time actually getting to it, for one thing, and also when the other engine was fired up, it would create such a loud noise since the sound waves would be bouncing off the insides of the locomotive body, and it would just cause such a terrible mess. So as a result, UP swapped out the fuel tank for a weight and created an accessible walkway along the length of the locomotive. Now, if you were paying attention and you heard me say 2 types of engines, a normal diesel engine and a turbine, then you are not mistaken and you have not accidentally had your earphones or your earbuds or your volume turned down. But yes, these locomotives and the predecessors to this locomotive had 2 types of diesel locomotives, or 1 turbine and a normal diesel locomotive. The reason being is because the gas turbine itself, like a jet engine literally, is very difficult to actually start it up, and once it's started up, it creates such a loud noise, and its fuel consumption is greater when it's just standing still or going at a low speed. So, to combat that, UP was smart enough to actually put a normal diesel engine inside the rear of the locomotive, and that engine would actually be turned on every time the locomotive is started up, and when the locomotive needs to be moved to a certain area, that locomotive engine would actually be turned on and used to then transport the engine itself to its destination. But when the locomotive is about to take a train out of the yard or reaches a certain speed, the turbine is then kicked on, and that extra horsepower and speed is then included and the normal diesel engine is turned off. Now, something interesting about the model you see in front of you, Lionel was actually able to represent this. So if you actually have one of these models, or if you're thinking about purchasing one of these, I'll explain the price later, but if you actually operate one of these on your layout, and when you turn it on, you may notice that there's only one smoke unit coming on, and that is the one back here. I'll show you it later and also explain how you can actually fill the smoke unit up with smoke fluid. But this unit is meant to represent the diesel engine in the rear of the locomotive. Now, that's going to be the only smoke unit that is going to be operating when the locomotive is either standing still or it has reached a speed step of around 4 to 6. Once it reaches one of those speed steps, the turbine itself, which the exhaust stack is right here, will then kick on, and the sounds that goes with it will then sound up, and the smoke will start billowing out of the exhaust stack for the turbine, and the smoke coming out of the diesel engine exhaust will then shut off, which is prototypical, as stated earlier, since the diesel engine would be first turned on and be used until it gets to a certain speed, and then the big, huge turbine is then powered up to then haul the train itself for the rest of the trip. Now that you have a better understanding on what a gas turbine is, and also you have a better understanding on the Veranda class and the reasoning why UP got into the turbine niche market of locomotives, let me now actually give you the stats and facts on the model in front of you, and then later on I'll show you the separately applied and molded in detailing on this wonderful model. To start off, this model was recently cataloged in the 2001 Volume 2 Lionel Trains catalog, and the set includes the locomotive in the front and then the auxiliary fuel tender in the rear. And with a combined length of 30 inches, this locomotive has a minimum curve radius of 0.72. Now, to give a bit of a reference point to its length of both the locomotive and the tender, this locomotive set is just about 2 inches shy than my Vision Line Big Boy and most other big boys from Lionel. Under the hood, this locomotive has 2 operating smoke units, one for the turbine smoke unit, or turbine exhaust, and one for the diesel engine exhaust, which I was discussing earlier when I was explaining the model itself. And then also, this locomotive has 2 flywheel motors, one for the lead trucks and then one for the rear trucks. To operate this locomotive, it has the TMCC command system, or the Cab 1 command system. Now, to operate this locomotive, you have 3 choices. The first way is via the Cab 2 command system, or the Legacy command system. Now, take note, if you are going to operate this locomotive or any TMCC locomotive with the Cab 2 command system, make sure that you program that locomotive in TMCC mode, and if the locomotive has Rail Sounds 5.0, then make sure it's programmed into that, or if it has Rail Sounds 4.0 and lower, make sure that the remote control is programmed to Rail Sounds. Now, the other method, and the preferred method, since this is a TMCC locomotive, is the Cab 1 command system, which will allow you to still get all of the features that you can get out of this locomotive, but is a lot easier since that remote control is made for this locomotive, or vice versa. And then finally, the last method of operating this locomotive is conventional, by just having some track and a transformer. Now that you know what this locomotive is capable of, let me take a closer look and show you all of the wonderful molded in and separately applied detailing on this model. Looking at the front of the locomotive, you can first see that right off the bat, here is the front electrocoupler, which can be thrown by either the Cab 1 or Cab 2 remote control system. Looking past the electrocoupler, there is some molded in detailing in the form of a coupler cup bar, and looking above the coupler cup bar, there is a platform that has some molded in safety tread. Above the platform, there is a nicely done red stripe which runs along the length of the locomotive, and above the stripe, there is the iconic Wings and Shield UP emblem on the front of the nose. Right behind the emblem, there is a molded in door which leads into the cab, and also the Union Pacific name across the front. Looking right beside the doors, there are 2 separately applied grab irons, a headlamp, and also a Mars light, which does turn on when the locomotive is in operation, but when you put power to it, instead of it flashing right off the bat, a red light turns on, but when the locomotive is in motion, it then switches immediately over to a Mars light where it just flashes constantly until the locomotive is stopped. Looking on both sides of the headlight, there are two illuminated marker boards and two directional marker lights above the number boards. Looking on top of the nose, you can see that there is not a whole lot going on, but there is still some nice little details here and there. For example, there are some separately applied grab irons on both sides and hatches for, presumably, the sandboxes for this locomotive. Also, there are two clear plastic inserts for the windows, and also there is some nice molded in detailing above the windows, and some more molded in detailing in the form of these two horns and this box of some sorts. Also, one nice little touch I think that is nice that Lionel added to this model, and also something that UP did back in the late 40s and early 50s, is painting the top of the nose green. To me, that really makes a huge contrast to the bright yellow that you see all around with the red striping, and also that has a very important role for the crew as well. Instead of the light from the sun shining down and reflecting off of the bright yellow paint, it is highly more absorbed by the darker green paint and makes it where the crew are not blinded when they're going down the line. Moving down the side of the locomotive on the engineer's side, looking at the bottom, you can see that here is the front set of powered trucks on this model. And also take notice of there actually being two powered trucks. Now, since this is a unique model, and it being a model of the Veranda, which the real Verandas did have two sets of front and rear powered trucks, this is actually very prototypical. Looking around the trucks, you can see that the side frames are primarily have molded in detailing such as the springs and as well as the brake cylinders. And looking right here, there is a separately applied ladder which leads up to the walkway which runs along the length of the locomotive. Looking towards the nose, you can see that there is some more molded in detailing in the form of these hatches and grates, and also the continuation of that red stripe again continues along the length of the locomotive. Looking right here, here is a nicely done number 73, and looking up here, here is the engineer's side of the cab, and the cab windows actually do have clear plastic inserts. Now, speaking of the cab, instead of there actually being two crew figures inside, there's actually three this time. Presumably one for the engineer, one for the fireman, and then one for a maintenance man for either the turbine or the diesel engine. Continuing down the side of the locomotive, more specifically the engineer's side, you can now get a better look at the iconic feature on the Verandas, and that is the sunken in feature of the walkway to then service either the turbine or the diesel locomotive in the rear. Starting out at the bottom, middle, here is the separately applied die-cast metal ballast weight, and looking above there, here is the walkway that continues to run along the length of the locomotive, and right on the outside, here is a nicely done separately applied handrail that again runs along the length of the locomotive. Now, taking a quick look back towards the front, here's that ladder that you saw earlier. And one of the nice features that I think Lionel did when they made this model in the detail department is that they actually went ahead and made it to where the railings would actually come on down and curl into this J shape on either side. So instead of actually making it to where it's just one solid piece going across, instead they made it to go and curl around to where a crew member can then go up, service the locomotive, or actually go up into the cab via this molded in door right here, or either go all the way down this way to then reach the diesel engine on this model. Looking past the handrails, here is some more molded in detailing in the form of graded doors and hatches to access the turbine, and also this is a bulkhead port to actually either pull out a large component of the turbine or the turbine itself, and right across the middle here is the Union Pacific lettering. Finally, looking towards the rear end of the locomotive, you can first see that here is the second set of power trucks on this locomotive, again similar to the front in detail and paint scheme. Here is another separately applied ladder, which again goes up to these nicely done curled J handrails to then be able to get access to the platform, which ends right at this point. And looking over here, you may notice that this actually looks a little bit different or funky. Well, the reason being is because this is actually the compartment of the locomotive where the diesel engine is actually located. So in real life, a person or a crew member that is servicing this locomotive or operating this locomotive would theoretically come out from the cab from the access door in the rear of it, walk down the walkway, and then reach this section of the locomotive. Now, over here in this area, Lionel was able to model a molded-in door to access this area of the locomotive. Now, inside the model itself, there is actually a fan-driven smoke unit, which the exhaust stack is right here, and then also a flywheel motor. Now, back to the detail. As you can see, the handrail and the walkway ends right at this point, and looking right here, here is some more molded-in detailing in the form of doors and hatches to either access batteries or whatnot. Looking right here, here is a nice little clear plastic insert for a window into the compartment itself. Underneath there, here is another 73. And then right in the middle, here is a nice huge UP shield emblem, and in my opinion, it looks very nice on the model. Taking a quick look at the rear of the locomotive, starting at the bottom, here is the rear electrocoupler for this locomotive, and the second electrocoupler for out of the total of 4 in this set. Looking above here, here is the rear platform for the locomotive, and on the platform itself, there is a bunch of separately applied detailing in the form of handrails and this chain, and also this nicely done brake wheel. Now, on either side of the platform, there are 2 molded-in die-cast metal steps that lead up to the top of the platform, and looking at the rear of the locomotive itself, there is a nicely done molded-in door with a clear plastic insert for a porthole window. Looking over here, here is a separately applied ladder to reach or get access to the roof of the locomotive. Here is a engine backup light, so if you were not operating this locomotive with the fuel tender, then this backup light would be the backup light for the locomotive itself. And then finally, looking up here, here is some separately applied piping for the fuel pipes that go to the tender. Now, realistically, the original prototype that would have flexible pipes that would be connecting the auxiliary tender to these separately applied pipes. But with this said, it's only these 2 little nubs. Finally, before I actually show you the auxiliary fuel tender, let me first show you the top roof of the locomotive in front of you. To start off at the back, here's that separately applied pipe work that I showed you earlier from the rear, and looking right here, if you can see, here is the top view of the exhaust stack for the supposed diesel engine. Now, you may be wondering, how do I actually fill up the smoke unit in either one? Well, both units are separate from each other. So there's one smoke unit in here and one smoke unit in here. So in this case, in order to fill the smoke unit in this one, you just directly pour the smoke fluid down the stack. Now, do take note that the only time when this smoke unit is actually in operation is when the locomotive is standing still or it is reached a speed step of 4 to 6. That is when the huge turbine smoke unit then kicks on. Looking past the smoke unit, here is some die-cast metal molded in detailing all along here, which really does make the locomotive unique and pop. Here is some more of that pipe detailing. And then right here, here is some molded in die-cast metal detailing for the turbine area. Finally, here is the waffle-shaped exhaust stack for the turbine itself. And I might as well actually again explain how you actually fill this smoke unit. Like the other one back here, you directly pour the smoke fluid directly through one of the grates in here, but I've actually taken apart this locomotive to actually see how the smoke fluid actually gets into the smoke unit itself. So in order for the smoke exhaust, I guess you could say, actually comes out of the waffle exhaust grate in a equal amount, and also in order for the smoke fluid to get into the same spot, if you in any way you actually pour it down through the stack, Lionel was able to produce a tray that has an angle that goes directly down a hole and that then connects into the hole for the smoke unit itself. So when you're actually filling the smoke unit for this locomotive on this unit, I highly suggest to actually not be very scarce or very polite with it, but instead really just jet it down there in order for the smoke fluid to actually reach that tiny little hole and then enter the smoke unit itself. Looking past there, we have some more molded in and separately applied detailing, such as this nice little pipe, this grating, and also finally this little box and these two nicely done horns. Finally, let's take a look at the auxiliary fuel tender that comes with this set. Looking at the front of the tender, as you can first see, here is the front electrocoupler for the tender, which is the third out of 4 electrocouplers included with this whole set. Looking on either side, here are 2 separately applied metal ladder stanchions, and looking right here, here is a molded in coupler cup bar. Above that, here is some more pipe detailing and a nicely done separately applied yellow brake wheel. Looking on either side of the brake wheel, here are 2 separately applied ladders which go up to the top of the tender itself, and right in the middle there is a UP number 73 indicating that this tender is meant to be used with engine number 73. Looking down the side, here are the 2 trucks for this tender, and as you can see that there is some nicely done molded in detailing, such as these brake shoe detailing and also journal box caps. Looking right in the middle, there is a nice separately applied die cast metal air tank, and right over here, here is some nicely done molded in chain links to give it a little bit of a touch to it. And looking right in the middle, here is the classic gray, red, and yellow UP paint scheme with the classic Union Pacific Railroad block lettering along the side of the tender itself. And also, here is a better look at the 2 ladder stanchions that I was talking about when I was showing you around to the rear of the tender. Here is the last electrocoupler, or the rear electrocoupler for the tender, and is the 4 out of 4 electrocouplers in total for this set. Also, here is another molded in coupler cup bar, and also here is 2 more ladder stanchions, which you saw this one when I showed you the side of it. Looking here above that, here are 2 more separately applied metal ladders, which again go up to the top of the fuel tender. And also here is the UP73 again, and finally the backup light. Now, something interesting about this set is that both the locomotive itself and tender actually have to be programmed at the same time. Now, underneath the tender itself, there's a run program switch, which you would usually see on a steam locomotive, diesel locomotive, or in this case, a gas turbine. Now, when you're actually programming the tender to the locomotive, you have to have both these switches to the program position in order for it to actually be programmed together. Once it has been programmed together, the command system or remote control that you're using, such as the cab 1, will then realize that instead of having to throw the rear electrocoupler on the locomotive itself, it will be throwing this one. And also, instead of illuminating the reverse light on the locomotive itself, which I showed you earlier, instead it will illuminate this one. Finally, before I get some cars behind this locomotive and start it up and show you what it can actually do sound-wise and operating-wise, here is a brief look at the top of the auxiliary water tender. Starting at the front this time, here again are those 2 separately applied ladders, and as you can see, it then ends on this side of this platform. Now, something interesting that I like about the platform is that Lionel made it to where that the top of the platform is rigid, as if it is made for safety tread or has been used for paneling of some sort. Looking all around, you can also see that there is a whole lot of separately applied metal handrails. Starting over here, there's one here at an angle, another one there, one going around this side of this step-down platform, and then two going along the length of the tender itself. Now, on top of the platform as well, besides the ridging or the safety tread, there's also two hatches, one here and one here. Now, both of them do not open, and they are only just molded in detailing. But still, it is nice for Lionel to actually go ahead and put that detail in. Now that I've shown you all of the wonderful separately applied and molded in detailing on this extremely heavy die-cast model, let me now actually put power to the track, start it up, and show you some of the sound features that this model has, and then finish the video up by running it around the layout. As you can see, right off the bat, this locomotive is also very, very loud. Now, in order to produce this loud sound, this locomotive is equipped with the Lionel Rail Sounds 4.0 system, and to output that, this locomotive also has one large Fat Boy speaker. So, without further ado, let me first start off with the horn on this model. Next, here's the bell. Now, this locomotive also has the rev up and rev down features. So here is it going up. Here is the revs going down. Now, I do know some of you do not like the crew talk chatter, but for those who do, I'm just going to go and play it for them, and also it is optional.
Union Pacific 7-3, you are cleared outbound. Union Pacific 7-3, please stand by.
Now that I've shown you all of the sound features that this locomotive has to offer, let me now actually wrap things up by showing you how much power this model has by running it around the layout. Well, that about wraps up this video, but before I go, let me actually answer the two questions that I usually answer around this time, and they are, what is the original MSRP price, and also, what is my personal opinion about this model? Well, back in 2001, Lionel had this model with a price tag of $1,250. Now, since this is a model made back in 2001, or in other words, a 19-year-old model, you may actually have a hard time being able to find one of these and be able to purchase it. Now, one of the best places that I can think of would either be through the OGR forum, eBay, or even at your local hobby shop if they have one of these back in their storerooms. Now, if you are able to find one of these, you may be able to actually get a good price on it than the original $250 or $1,250 price tag, and if you can, then good for you. Now on to my personal opinion about this model. Well, in short, it is a great model. The sound features are phenomenal, they sound like the real deal, the smoke units are incredible, and this thing can haul a ton. Now, this model, I will say, if you have a weak back, then I would suggest not getting this model. This model is very, very heavy. If I had a bathroom scale, I imagine it would max it out because this thing is massive and extremely heavy. Now, the reason being is because Lionel went above and beyond by making this model mainly out of die-cast metal. That is why when I was going through the model and showing you all of the detail on it, that's why you saw mostly molded in detailing, because Lionel made this thing with a robust die-cast metal body. Now, on top of that, down to the sound system, it is just, as I said, phenomenal. It really does give me the feeling that it is a huge turbine-powered locomotive going down the track. And if you have a steam layout, this would be perfect, since it was basically used in the late 40s and early 50s when big boys, Challengers, and FEFs were going down the line on the Cheyenne and Utah region. Now, down to the smoke units. One of the things that I really like about it is that Lionel did not go and have both smoke units blaring off at the same time. Instead, they did their homework and were able to fix it to where, or not fix it, but make it to where at first the rear smoke unit would kick on and only the sounds for the diesel engine would actually be on. But when the locomotive is moving at a certain speed, the second smoke unit comes off and the sounds of a turbine kicks on, which is very prototypical. Now, what I'm about to say is maybe may offend you, but I'm not downsizing MTH. Now, MTH, if you've seen their model of the Veranda with the ProtoSound 3.0 system, is a great model. Don't get me wrong, it is a great model, and they've gone beyond the Call of Duty on creating gas turbines, but the only problem I have with it is that when you start up the locomotive, standing still or moving, both smoke units are constantly turned on. Now, yes, MTH hands down has the best smoke units, but the only issue I have is that they do not give the prototypical sense as the Lionel version in front of you. So, in other words, 10 out of 10 Lionel for you back in 2001. This is a great model, and I'm so happy I was able to review it. Well, that about wraps up this product review. I just want to say thank you very much for clicking on this video and also watching it to the very end. Now, if you would be so kind, please click on the subscribe button, because then this will allow you to no longer miss any of my future videos on the subject of product reviews, running sessions, or just generally talking trains. Now, while you're at it, could you also please the like button? This lets me know that you actually enjoyed the video and also lets YouTube know that my channel is actually worth something. But anyway, my name is Trainmaster04 and I'll see you next time.